Are you ready to step into a world of ghosts, darkness, and true terror? If you love real horror stories, chilling mysteries, and spine-tingling suspense, then subscribe to The Untold Persona. Now, we bring you true paranormal tales from America. Creepy, intense, and hauntingly unforgettable. Each episode will drag you deeper into the shadows, where fear whispers and silence screams. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story from the other side. The Untold Persona, where the dead still speak. Scary deep woods stories. The ritual in red pines. It began with a blood moon rising over the jagged silhouettes of the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana, casting a strange red glow across the dense expanse of forest known as the Red Pines. No roads led through the heart of that wilderness, and for decades it had been left alone, whispered about in bars and old hunting cabins as cursed land, ground that remembers, ground that judges. The stories were enough to keep most people away, but not the group of 5 friends from Missoula who wanted one last adventure before parting ways after college. There was Caleb, the quiet one, with a fascination for maps and native legends. Jenna, always the skeptic, more into ghosts as entertainment than belief. Marcus, loud and brash, dragging his camera everywhere for his up-and-coming YouTube horror series. Naomi, practical, level-headed, and secretly carrying mace in her backpack, and Drew, the one who found the journal. That was where it started. In the basement of an abandoned library scheduled for demolition, Drew found a rotting, leather-bound book beneath loose floorboards. It was filled with strange symbols, Latin passages, and hand-drawn maps that pointed to a clearing deep in red pines, marked only by the word offer place. They laughed about it over beers that night, but by morning, Caleb had deciphered enough of the book to see that the ritual described wasn't a joke. It was a summoning, not of a demon, but of something older, something local, something buried beneath centuries of pine roots and blood. The group set off in early September, the air already crisp and the trail barely visible through overgrowth and moss-covered stones. They had GPS, but the deeper they went, the more it failed. Their compasses spun. Animals stopped appearing. Trees leaned inward. Trunks twisted unnaturally, as if repelled by whatever lay at the center of the forest. On the second day, they found the totems, wooden figures strung from the trees by sinew and hair, all staring inward. Caleb said they marked sacred ground. Jenna joked that it was a horror movie set. Marcus filmed everything. That night, they set up camp beside a dry riverbed, littered with the bones of deer. At exactly 2:17 a.m., they were woken by a humming sound, low, harmonic, like a choir underwater. They stepped out of their tents to see fireflies moving in perfect spirals, forming runes in the air. Drew opened the book. The pages were no longer blank. Fresh ink had bled through, forming new instructions. Circle of 5. Blood of 4, 1 to remain, 1 to rise. Caleb wanted to leave. Naomi agreed, but Marcus insisted they were close to something historic. Fame, discovery. He followed the map alone that morning and didn't return. They found his camera near a stone circle later that afternoon, but not him. On the footage, he had walked into the clearing and then screamed, just once. The sound cut out. Then something whispered, "He sees you now." The group argued whether to stay or go. Jenna insisted they were being manipulated by the book, by the place. But Drew, obsessed, said the ritual needed to be completed, that it was the only way to bring Marcus back. He showed them new passages. The blood circle is incomplete. You must give. The forest waits. That night, something stalked them. Naomi saw it first. Tall, covered in bark, its limbs too long, moving between the trees without sound. They ran, but the forest didn't let them go. Trails looped back. Trees they marked changed position. On the 5th night, Caleb vanished. No sound, no struggle, just gone. Only his boots remained, filled with dirt and pine needles. Jenna snapped. She burned the book, but the fire wouldn't catch. It was wet with something black, something that moved. Drew had changed. His eyes were hollow. He spoke in a voice not his own. The offering nears. The soil remembers. The tree god wakes. The sky turned crimson. The moon swelled unnaturally large. Time felt wrong. They no longer knew how many days they'd been in the woods. On the seventh day, they reached the clearing, the true offer place. Massive stones formed a circle, and at the center stood an ancient altar, carved with faces screaming in silence. The bark creature waited, antlers wide like dead branches, holding Caleb's heart in one hand, still beating. Drew stepped forward and smiled. "I brought them," he whispered. "I fulfilled the pact. Now I stay, now I rise." The creature reached for him, and the forest itself breathed in. Naomi tried to run, but the trees closed around her. Jenna screamed. The ritual had begun, and only one would leave the red pines alive. Darkness clung to the forest like a second skin as the altar shimmered in the red glow of the blood moon, casting grotesque shadows of the carved faces that seemed to twist and scream as if in pain. Naomi and Jenna, frozen by the overwhelming force that pressed down on them from all sides, watched in horror as Drew stepped willingly toward the bark-covered creature, whose antlers scraped the very canopy above. The air smelled of sap and decay, and something older, something metallic and foul. Drew's face no longer bore any trace of the friend they once knew. His expression was vacant, his body moving like a puppet on invisible strings. As he knelt before the altar, the book reappeared in his hands, now glowing faintly with an internal fire, and he began chanting in a voice that sounded layered, his own overlaid with something ancient and alien. Jenna, trembling, grabbed Naomi's hand and whispered that they had to run, that if they stayed, they would become part of whatever monstrous ritual was unfolding. But every direction they turned, the forest shifted. Trees that were once behind them appeared ahead. Their path backward was gone, swallowed by moving roots and encroaching mist. The altar pulsed. Drew's chanting intensified. The bark creature raised its arms and let out a roar that sounded like a storm passing through stone. Then the ground began to shake. Faces rose from the earth, faces of those who had come before. Mouths agape in silent screams, eyes gouged or sealed shut with pitch. Naomi, shaking off the paralysis, yanked Jenna and bolted, weaving between trees, dodging jutting roots and ducking under low branches. The forest groaned in protest. Branches slashed at them like claws. They didn't know how long they ran, only that the red light never faded, that the chanting followed them no matter how far they fled. When they finally collapsed beside a crumbling stone wall partially buried under moss, they found themselves at the edge of what once was a village, abandoned cabins overtaken by vegetation, collapsed roofs and rusting iron tools strewn in the underbrush. Symbols were carved into every wooden surface, spirals, eyes, and stick-like figures impaled on spires. Naomi realized with a chill that this place was no accident. It was part of the ritual, another circle feeding the core. Jenna crept toward the largest cabin, its door hanging off one hinge, and inside they found remnants of a life stopped mid-motion. Plates still set on a table, a rotted cradle with the skeleton of a small animal curled inside, and in the corner a wall covered in pages, dozens of them, torn from the same book Drew carried. Each one had a different set of instructions, offerings, symbols, warnings. One page had been written over again and again until the paper tore. "You cannot flee. The forest is the circle. The god must wake." Naomi turned to Jenna and said what they both feared. The forest wasn't cursed. It was alive. It was sentient, and it was hungry. Something had bound it centuries ago through ritual and sacrifice, and Drew had just broken the final seal. They needed to destroy the book, but it was with Drew. Worse, the creature now had Caleb and Marcus, and possibly others. The group hadn't just stumbled into this. Drew had led them here, chosen them, and possibly from the beginning. Jenna remembered the dream she had the first night in the forest, one she dismissed as sleep paralysis. A tall man with antlers whispering her name. She realized now it wasn't a dream. It was a calling, and she had answered. The forest allowed them to stay in the ghost village for the night, or perhaps it held them there. They tried not to sleep, but exhaustion took them, and when Naomi awoke, Jenna was gone. In her place was a symbol carved in the dirt with a finger, an eye with a slash through it, and her name etched beneath in blood. Jenna had been taken, or worse, had gone willingly. Naomi was alone now, and the trees were starting to move again. Naomi didn't scream when she saw the blood, because something inside her told her that if she made a sound, the forest would notice, and it was already watching. The crude eye slashed through the middle, and the names scrawled beneath it in blood were all that remained of Jenna. Naomi crouched, breathing through her nose, trying not to retch as the scent of iron hit her like a wall. The blood was fresh, still wet, still warm. Jenna couldn't have been gone long. She scanned the trees, but everything looked the same. Endless trunks stretching up into the perpetual twilight, branches gnarled like arthritic fingers, swaying though there was no wind. Her muscles screamed to run, but where? The village behind her was crumbling, empty. The altar lay somewhere deeper in the woods, surrounded by that thing, whatever had taken Drew, Marcus, and Caleb. A sound stopped her thoughts cold. It was soft at first, like leaves brushing together, but then it took form, a giggle, childlike, wrong. It echoed from nowhere and everywhere, bouncing between trees, warping as it grew louder, deeper, until it became a choking, guttural rasp that made her vision blur. She turned sharply and bolted into the woods, heedless of direction, crashing through undergrowth, thorns tearing at her legs, branches slashing her arms and face. The laughter followed. It didn't fade with distance. It moved with her as if the sound itself was embedded in the air, in the dirt, in her skin. She ran until her legs gave out, collapsing near a shallow depression in the forest floor. At first she thought it was just another patch of shadow, but then her eyes adjusted and she saw the bones, hundreds of them, stacked and woven into the earth like roots, some old and brittle, others disturbingly fresh. She staggered back, bile rising in her throat, and her hand landed on something smooth and hard. She looked down and saw a mask. It was carved from wood so dark it was nearly black, shaped into a screaming face with hollow eyes and jagged teeth. She picked it up against her better judgment and immediately felt a vibration run through her arm, up her neck, and into her skull. Images burst into her mind. Rituals under blood moons, naked figures dancing around fires, children being buried beneath trees, and always the creature watching, its antlers dripping sap like blood, its hollow face stretched into an imitation of sorrow. She threw the mask away and backed into a tree, sobbing now, every part of her shaking. Then she heard her name, whispered once, close to her ear. She turned sharply. Nothing there. Again, Naomi, but this time from the other side. Her breath caught. It was Jenna's voice. She stood slowly, terrified but unable to stop herself, drawn toward the voice like a tether was wound around her chest. She walked, each step deeper into silence, until she came upon a clearing she hadn't seen before. In the center was a massive pine tree, unlike the others, twisted, blackened, its bark cracked and bleeding something dark. Beneath it stood Jenna, but her eyes were wrong, too wide, too still. Her mouth opened slowly and said, "He forgave me." "Will you?" Naomi froze. Jenna raised her hand and pointed behind Naomi. The bark creature stood inches from her, silent, its antlers scraping the treetops. And as she turned to run, the forest shifted again. The trees spun like a carousel. The sky bled red, and Naomi knew she was no longer in the red pines. She was in it, inside its memory, inside its hunger, and it would not let her go until the ritual was fulfilled. Naomi couldn't remember how long she had been running. Time inside red pines didn't behave like the world she knew. The sun didn't rise or set. It hovered like a faded bruise behind layers of mist, casting a sickly glow that never shifted. The forest didn't breathe. It pulsed, like a living organism made of bark, blood, and memory. Her feet bled. Her hands were torn from clawing past brambles and roots that reached for her like fingers. And still she ran, driven by the image of Jenna's empty eyes and the towering figure that loomed behind her like death incarnate. But running no longer helped. The forest had changed. Paths looped back onto themselves. Fallen trees she had passed only minutes ago appeared ahead of her again, unchanged. She had marked one trunk with her pocket knife, 3 jagged lines, but when she passed it a third time, there were 7. She wasn't alone in her mind anymore. Something was inside, whispering, pressing. Every thought felt borrowed, every memory warped. She began to doubt her own name, her purpose, her reality. Her dreams bled into her waking moments. She saw Drew hanging from the trees, swaying gently as if cradled by the wind. But when she blinked, he was gone. She heard Marcus screaming from beneath the earth, muffled by layers of damp soil, only for the sound to vanish when she fell to her knees to dig. She came upon a cabin she hadn't seen before, ancient, sagging, built from logs darker than night. A single lantern burned in the window, casting a flickering amber glow. Naomi approached with a mixture of hope and terror. The door creaked open before she touched it. Inside, the air was warm but fetid, smelling of rot and old blood. The walls were covered in drawings, charcoal images of figures dancing around trees, children with hollow eyes kneeling before a crowned beast, and the altar. Always the altar. She stepped further in, drawn to a large book lying open on a table. Its pages were made of stitched skin, its ink a black so dark it seemed to absorb light. She read the words aloud before she realized what she was saying. "He who feeds the roots shall wake the forest." The moment the final syllable left her lips, the walls shook. Dust fell from the beams above. The drawings began to weep, thick dark tears that smeared the figures and made them writhe like they were alive. Naomi backed away, but the door slammed shut behind her. A mirror on the far wall lit up like fire, though no flame touched it. Her reflection stared back at her. But it wasn't her. It wore her face, but the eyes were deep pits, and its mouth curled into a grin too wide for any human. "You've been chosen," it whispered, and the words echoed inside her chest like a second heartbeat. The lantern shattered. The room plunged into red, and in the darkness, something moved. A crawling, wet sound, like flesh dragging across wood. Naomi turned and bolted toward the door, but her hands slipped on the knob, now slick with something warm. She screamed, not out of fear, but frustration, despair, the realization that escape was no longer possible. The creature in the shadows whispered her name over and over, each time closer, deeper, hungrier. Then, silence. The door opened slowly on its own. Naomi stumbled outside and found herself not in the forest, but on the edge of a massive clearing filled with standing stones. In the center stood the altar, real now, not a vision. And around it, 12 figures in cloaks, their faces hidden, humming low, guttural notes that made her stomach twist. They turned in unison, one pointed. And as Naomi stepped forward, compelled by something ancient and irresistible, the forest behind her closed like a mouth, swallowing her name, her memories, her life. The ritual had begun, and she was no longer a witness, she was the offering. Naomi stood paralyzed at the edge of the clearing, her heart hammering against her rib cage like a desperate prisoner. The 12 cloaked figures surrounding the altar didn't speak, didn't move, yet their presence was deafening. The low humming that had once seemed dissonant now throbbed in rhythm with her pulse, as if her body had become a part of the ritual itself. The altar in the center, black stone slick with an unknown liquid, seemed to breathe, subtly rising and falling like the chest of a sleeping beast. Naomi tried to turn away, to run back into the woods, but her legs refused to obey. Every muscle in her body trembled under an invisible pressure, like invisible hands gripping her bones. The figures parted, opening a path directly to the altar. Behind it stood something taller than any man, shrouded in shadow, its form flickering like a flame, but rooted like an ancient tree. Its antlers twisted like roots gone mad, and its eyes burned with an unnatural intelligence. Calm, knowing, hungry. Naomi's breath hitched as she was drawn forward, step by reluctant step, her feet sinking into the damp moss, the ground warm and pulsing beneath her like skin. As she approached the altar, memories that were not hers surged into her mind. Visions of children being led to this very place across centuries, their screams muffled by the trees, their names never spoken again. She saw a woman wrapped in chains, praying to a god made of bark and bone, promising her blood in exchange for a season of harvest. She saw a hunter offered in penance for killing a red fox, dragged screaming by villagers wearing wooden masks. Naomi stumbled but did not fall. The pressure behind her forced her onward. She reached the altar, and the figure behind it raised its long, branch-like arms. The humming grew louder. A gust of wind swirled through the clearing, carrying voices, chanting in a language older than words, vibrating through her skull, bending her thoughts. Naomi looked down at the surface of the altar and saw her reflection. But it was not her. The reflection stared up with black eyes and a stitched mouth, as if something inside her had already been silenced, already given. The robed figures began to sway. The earth beneath the altar cracked, revealing roots, wet, bloody roots that reached upward like veins. The creature behind the altar stepped forward, towering above Naomi, who now couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. It raised one clawed hand and pressed a single finger to her forehead. The touch burned. Searing images flooded her consciousness. A deer with no skin, a child with no mouth crying soundlessly, a spiral carved into a chest, a forest made entirely of teeth. She screamed, but no sound escaped. The figure spoke, not aloud, but within her mind, and its voice was the creaking of ancient trees and the snapping of necks. You are not the first. You will not be the last. The forest remembers. With a violent motion, it slashed across her palm with a claw. Blood spilled onto the altar. The roots quivered, drank. Naomi collapsed to her knees, her mind unraveling, frayed by pain, confusion, and something deeper, acceptance. One of the robed figures stepped forward, pulling down their hood. It was Jenna. Her eyes were black, her smile wide and void of warmth. You brought us back, she whispered. You opened the path. You belong to him now. Naomi looked around. The other figures removed their hoods, faces she recognized. Drew, Marcus, others who had vanished in red pines over the years, now vessels of the forest, their identities hollowed out and replaced with something older, darker. The chanting stopped. Silence fell, thick and absolute. Then the ground split open with a deafening crack, revealing an abyss beneath the altar, a chasm of writhing roots and shadowy limbs. Naomi was lifted by invisible force, levitating above the altar, her limbs stiff, her eyes wide with terror. The creature behind her raised both arms, and from the abyss below came a voice not meant for human ears, a sound that peeled away her sanity, layer by layer. As Naomi was lowered into the altar's hollow, the forest exhaled, the clearing pulsed, the figures bowed, and red pines claimed another. Naomi didn't remember how long she had been in the darkness beneath the altar. Time dissolved in that place. It wasn't a tunnel, or a pit, or a cavern. It was something alive. The walls pulsed with warmth, slick with moisture, and throbbed in sync with her heartbeat as if the forest itself had swallowed her whole and was slowly digesting her. She drifted in and out of consciousness, unable to tell dream from memory, hallucination from reality. She saw flashes of her childhood, her mother's hands planting tomatoes in the backyard, her father building the fence, her first kiss with Drew in the high school gym. But the memories twisted, faces melting into bark, fingers into claws, laughter into screams. She awoke tangled in roots that bound her wrists and ankles like ancient ropes, hanging just above a pool of black, reflective liquid that rippled without touch. Her voice was gone, throat raw from screaming that had never left her mouth. Above her, the roots nodded into strange symbols, geometries that hurt to look at, while the walls whispered in voices not quite human, not quite animal. The voice of the forest, the voice of him. Then she felt it, something crawling across her skin, under her skin, through her veins. It wasn't physical. It was a sensation, like her thoughts were no longer solely her own. Something was inside her, watching from behind her eyes, testing the seams of her identity. She could feel it learning her name, her memories, her fears, especially her fears. She fought it, summoned every ounce of willpower to resist, but every attempt to push back only fed the thing inside her. Like resistance was the offering it had always wanted. She saw her hands twitch without command, her fingers flexing like they belonged to someone else. And then the dreams began again. She dreamed of the town, of red pines devouring itself. She saw the gas station clerk tearing off his skin in front of a mirror, whispering, "He is here." She saw the sheriff hanging from the water tower with antlers nailed into his skull. She saw children standing motionless in the schoolyard, eyes black as voids, mouths sewn shut with vines. She saw the forest spreading, growing, its roots cracking through pavement, its branches bursting through rooftops. Every image seared into her mind like a brand, and yet felt inevitable, like prophecy. She awoke screaming, or thought she did, but no sound escaped. Instead, the whispering in the roots grew louder, like they were mocking her pain, feeding off it. Her body was weak. She could no longer tell if she was bleeding or if the walls wept for her. In the distance, though distance meant nothing in that space, she heard footsteps, real ones, heavy, human. They echoed strangely, distorted by the living architecture around her. The roots writhed in response. Something was coming. She strained her neck, fighting against the bindings, until a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Marcus. His eyes were sunken, ringed in black, but his face was his. He wasn't in robes. He looked human. He stepped forward, reaching out a trembling hand toward her. "Naomi," he whispered, voice hoarse like he hadn't spoken in years. "You have to listen. You don't have much time. He can't fully take you unless you give yourself willingly. That's how the ritual works. It needs consent, even if it breaks you first." Naomi stared at him, barely comprehending. He knelt beside her, his face etched with guilt and terror. "I fought it too," he said. "At first, I thought I could resist, escape, but the longer you stay here, the harder it gets to remember who you are. It'll offer you things, visions, power, knowledge. It'll make you forget the pain, the fear, but it's a lie." A tremor shook the chamber. Roots tensed. The black pool beneath her bubbled. Marcus flinched. "I don't have much time. I came to help, but if they know I'm down here—" He was cut off by a shriek, a piercing, inhuman wail that echoed through the cavern like 1,000 dying birds. Marcus's eyes widened. "Number, no, no, no!" He turned to run, but roots shot from the walls, impaling him through the back, lifting him into the air. Naomi watched in silent horror as his body was dragged into the ceiling, vanishing in seconds, his screams replaced by silence. Then the voice returned, inside her, wrapping around her brain like a parasite made of honey and razors. "He failed. You will not. The forest chose you." Naomi writhed, her body convulsing against the restraints as the black liquid rose higher, licking her toes with unnatural cold. Her vision blurred. She could feel herself slipping, fracturing, like the core of her identity was being erased and rewritten. And worst of all, deep down, beneath the fear and pain, a part of her was starting to accept it. A part of her was starting to believe that she did belong to the forest, that the ritual was only beginning. Naomi woke, or thought she did, gasping in a darkness so total it felt like a solid thing pressed against her eyes. The air was thick and moist, smelling of wet moss, iron, and something ancient, something rotting yet still alive. Her body trembled as if it had been submerged in cold water for days. She tried to speak, but her lips wouldn't move, and her throat produced only a rasping breath. Her arms were free now, no longer held by roots, but she couldn't tell if it was freedom or if she had simply stopped resisting. She lay on a bed of moss, but it pulsed under her like a heartbeat, and she realized with a jolt of dread that it was breathing. The forest was breathing with her, or worse, she was breathing with the forest. Something had shifted inside her. She could feel it, like a second soul blooming in her chest. Her thoughts no longer came in words alone, but in images, sensations, instincts not her own. The whispering hadn't stopped. It had simply moved deeper, into the marrow of her bones. The forest wasn't speaking to her. It was speaking through her. She stood unsteady, her legs trembling, but functional. Around her the cavern stretched endlessly, walls shifting like muscle, breathing slowly. The pool of black liquid had receded, but a trail of its residue led away into the shadows, like a slug's path or the trail of something dragged. She followed it, her bare feet silent on the moss-covered floor. Not out of courage, but compulsion. She wasn't alone in her body anymore. Her fingers brushed the wall as she walked, and it responded, shuddering faintly, as if her touch aroused it. She flinched, pulling her hand away, but the sensation lingered, echoing inside her spine. As she walked deeper, faint lights appeared. Pale, bioluminescent growths clinging to the walls, shaped like eyes that blinked as she passed. Some were wide and childlike. Others were slitted like a serpent's. One looked exactly like her own. Then she heard music. Not human music, but a pattern of tones and hums vibrating in frequencies that bypassed her ears and resonated in her stomach. The melody called to her, pulling her toward its source like a siren song. She emerged into a chamber vast and circular, the ceiling hidden in a canopy of twisted roots, and in the center stood a stone altar covered in writhing vines. Upon it lay a figure, motionless, draped in red robes. A mask rested beside the body. Naomi approached slowly, each step heavier than the last, her mind screaming in silence to turn back. She recognized the body before she even reached it. Drew, his skin was pale, lips blue, but his chest still rose and fell with shallow breaths. He was alive, barely. His wrists were bound in thorn vines that bled into the altar, feeding it. Naomi stumbled forward, shaking him, calling his name in a hoarse whisper. His eyes fluttered open, clouded with something inhuman, and for a moment he didn't seem to recognize her. Then, clarity. He gasped. "Naomi, you found it." She nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. He tried to speak more, but a violent convulsion shook his body, and from his mouth came a choking growl not of this world. She recoiled. The forest had taken root inside him. Literally. Beneath his skin, something shifted, bulged. His veins glowed faintly green. He opened his eyes again, and this time they were black as the void. He smiled. "He sees through me now," he said. "He sees through us all." Naomi backed away, but the vines reacted to her fear, slithering around her ankles, tightening. She screamed, not in words, but in primal desperation, and the forest echoed her cry. The walls trembled, and a figure stepped out from the shadows opposite her. Father Bell, or what was once him. His body was taller now, elongated unnaturally, his face stretched, mouth split too wide in a grin that revealed teeth like thorns. His robes dripped with sap and blood, and his hands were no longer hands but root-like claws. "You've come so far, child," he intoned, voice layered with dozens of others, male and female, young and old, human and not. "You were chosen before you were born, before this town was born." Naomi shook her head violently, tears blinding her, trying to deny the rising truth inside her that part of her had always known this was her fate. Bell approached, raising a hand that glowed with sickly green light. "The ritual cannot be stopped, only fulfilled. You are the vessel. You will be the bridge between our world and his." Naomi screamed again, reaching for Drew, but he was gone now, eyes blank, smiling as roots pierced through his chest and wrapped around her wrists, lifting her beside him. The altar pulsed, its surface splitting open like a mouth hungry for flesh. Naomi thrashed, but the roots held her tight, and Bell began to chant. The chamber echoed with an ancient language that bypassed sound entirely, burrowing into her thoughts. She felt her mind breaking, fracturing into splinters of self. And then, a spark. Somewhere deep within, a single memory. A laugh shared with Drew by the lake, years ago, before everything went wrong. That moment grounded her, reminded her she was still Naomi, still human, still capable of resistance. She clenched her fists. The forest shrieked. Bell howled in rage. The ritual wasn't over, but for the first time something inside Naomi fought back. Not just fear, not just instinct, but fury. And the forest did not like that, not one bit. The fury inside Naomi erupted like wildfire, a heat surging through her veins that clashed violently with the cold, parasitic presence of the forest trying to consume her. The vines coiled around her wrists trembled as if sensing a change, their grip loosening just enough for her to twist her body violently. Breaking free from the altar's embrace, with a scream that wasn't entirely human anymore. She fell hard to the mossy ground, gasping as the ancient chanting echoed and faltered. Father Bell, if he was still Bell, staggered back in surprise, the green glow in his chest flickering erratically like a flame confronted by wind. "Impossible," he growled, voice cracking into inhuman frequencies. "The vessel does not resist, the vessel accepts." But Naomi was no longer merely a vessel. Something inside her had cracked open. Yes, but not in submission. The memory of Drew, the sound of his laugh at the lake, the warmth of sunlight on their skin, the way he had once told her she was stronger than she knew. All of it surged within her, fusing with the forest corruption, not as weakness, but as defiance. Naomi stood, bloody and shaking, her eyes locked on Belle as she reached down and ripped the thorn vines from her skin. Blood spurting from the torn flesh, but pain no longer slowing her down. Behind her, Drew's body convulsed again, but this time, something expelled from his mouth, a thick, wriggling root that shrieked as it hit the altar, steaming like acid in sunlight. Drew collapsed, unconscious. The altar cracked. Bell screamed, not in fear, but in rage. His form twisted further, bones snapping, his face splitting like wet bark, revealing another face beneath, one with no eyes, only smooth wood etched with ancient runes that writhed like worms. "You cannot stop what has already begun," he hissed. "The forest has chosen. He is awake. He sees through your skin." Naomi grabbed the mask from beside Drew's body and hurled it at Bell with every ounce of strength she had. It struck his twisted face and exploded into splinters of wood and bone. And he howled, clutching at his face, the roots that once slithered eagerly toward Naomi, now writhing away from her. The chamber trembled violently. Roots detached from the ceiling and crashed to the floor. The bioluminescent eyes blinked rapidly, erratic like dying fireflies. Naomi didn't wait. She bent down and heaved Drew's unconscious form over her shoulders with the strength of desperation and stumbled toward the tunnel she'd entered through. But it was gone. The path had changed. The forest had shifted. She was trapped again. The walls pulsed, the moss beneath her feet turning from green to black, the very air beginning to hum with power. But this time Naomi didn't cower. She screamed into the air, a primal roar that sent vibrations through the ground. The forest responded. Not with rage, but confusion. The vessel was not following the pattern. She was breaking it. That was not supposed to be possible. As she turned back to face Bell, she saw him rise, his form now fully monstrous, towering and insectoid, limbs branching like skeletal trees, his voice no longer words but shrieks and clicks. The altar burst into flame behind him, green, licking the ceiling, revealing symbols carved into the very walls of the cavern. Scenes of sacrifice, transformation, rebirth, all culminating in a towering, antlered figure with no face standing above a field of kneeling worshippers. Naomi backed away slowly, but the cavern now pulsed with an intelligence aware of her, watching her. The forest knew she was a threat. She had tasted the darkness and spit it back out. Bell raised one jagged claw, and the walls groaned, birthing fresh vines that surged toward her like snakes. Naomi screamed and ran, not toward a clear path, but toward a crack in the wall, narrow and pulsing with faint light. She didn't think. She dove through it, dragging Drew behind her, feeling the roots slash her back as she slipped free. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough to crawl, and the air grew colder, wetter, metallic with the stench of blood and rust. Behind her, the cavern howled. The tunnel shook. She crawled forward through the dark, guided by instinct, by hope, by fury, and by something else. Something stirring inside her. A fire. Not of this world. She didn't know where it had come from, but it was hers now. She would burn this forest to the ground if she had to. The passage opened finally into a small chamber, circular, lined with carvings older than anything she had ever seen. Pictograms of humans with trees growing from their eyes, women giving birth to writhing roots, and a single inscription in blood-red paint that seemed to glow. Only the marked may return. Naomi looked at her arms. The wounds from the vines were no longer just bleeding. They were glowing faintly green, the same color Belle had worn, the same color the forest bled. She was marked now, but she wasn't theirs. She was her own. She slumped against the wall, Drew groaning faintly beside her, and for a brief moment the forest was quiet. But she knew it wouldn't last. The ritual was far from over. Belle was not dead. The thing he served was still watching, still hungry, and Naomi was now more than prey. She was an anomaly, a mistake, a threat, and that made her dangerous. The air in the chamber pressed in like 1,000 hands, dense and wet, reeking of rot and ancient secrets buried beneath centuries of moss and bone. Naomi sat with her back against the cold, rune-carved wall, her breath ragged, her eyes fixed on Drew's barely rising chest. His face was ashen, lips cracked and blue, sweat beading along his hairline, despite the chill. She pressed her fingers to his throat. There was a pulse, faint but real. He was alive, somehow. But she knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. The glow on her arms pulsed steadily now, as if syncing with some heartbeat deeper in the forest. Something vast and unseen, something that stirred when no one was watching. Naomi tried to steady herself, but a sudden vibration hummed through the stone beneath her, like a low moan rising from the earth itself. The walls began to breathe, literally inhaling and exhaling in long, labored gulps. Roots that had been dormant twitched with awareness, and a distant chant began to echo once more. Not from Belle, but from deeper within the forest's dark arteries. They hadn't stopped the ritual. They had only delayed it. Something was adapting, watching, learning. Naomi rose to her feet, staggering slightly. She scanned the walls. There had to be a way out. Her fingers traced the bloody symbols etched into the stone. The one that read, "Only the marked may return," glowed more fiercely now, reacting to the green light pulsating beneath her skin. Without understanding why, she pressed her glowing hand to the center of the inscription. The stone groaned like something waking from centuries of sleep. The wall in front of her cracked open vertically, revealing a tunnel lined with dripping roots and bones arranged like teeth, as though she was being invited into the mouth of something ancient. She didn't hesitate. Gripping Drew's arm, she dragged him through the opening, just before it sealed behind them with a wet slam. The tunnel sloped downward, impossibly deep, curving in unnatural angles that made her nauseous. The air grew warmer, then hot, then humid to the point of choking. And then the tunnel opened into a chamber unlike the others, not of stone and moss, but of flesh. The walls pulsed with veins. The floor was soft and spongy, soaked in blood and something thicker. Giant eye-like orbs blinked from the ceiling, watching her. In the center of the chamber was a pit, perfectly round, lined with writhing roots, and filled with a black liquid that smelled like death itself. And beside it, waiting, was a woman, or something wearing the skin of a woman. She was naked, hair cascading like wet vines, her eyes glowing the same green as the mark on Naomi's arms, her belly swollen and moving, as though something inside twisted and kicked. "You came," the woman said, voice melodic and terrible. "The forest called." The vessel broke the pattern. The pattern must be rewritten. Naomi stepped protectively in front of Drew, her fist clenched. "What are you?" The woman smiled and her skin cracked like bark, revealing the same wooden texture Naomi had seen on Belle. "I am what grows when the old gods rot. I am rebirth. I am hunger made holy. And you are the fracture." The pit behind the woman bubbled violently, and from its surface rose tendrils that moved with purpose. They reached toward Naomi, but stopped inches from her skin. The woman studied her, tilting her head. "You are marked, yet not claimed. You rejected the gift, but the forest has seen you now. It remembers your shape. You cannot leave." Naomi took a shaky step back. "I'm not staying. I'm taking him, and I'm ending this." The woman let out a laugh that sounded like branches snapping in a storm. "End? There is no end. Only cycles. Sacrifice, seed, soil, bloom. You've disrupted the bloom, but the roots run deep, girl. They run beneath your feet, beneath your skin, beneath your name." Naomi suddenly felt it again, that terrible heat in her chest, the green glow intensifying. Her vision blurred and images poured into her mind. People kneeling in red robes, children being marked with glowing sap, sacrifices atop blackened altars under moonless skies, generations of offerings to the thing that slumbered beneath red pines. She saw Bel's transformation, how he had knelt, how he had drunk from the pit, how the forest had opened its mouth and kissed him with rot. And then she saw herself, standing above the same pit, arms outstretched, her body split open by roots blooming like flowers from her chest. Naomi screamed and the vision shattered, the green glow on her arms dimming momentarily. The woman hissed, recoiling as if burned. "You resist again. The forest does not forget. The forest does not forgive." Naomi stepped forward, fists clenched, the blood on her skin now boiling, vapor rising. "Let it come for me. I'll burn it down. I'll kill whatever god you serve." The pit roared, and from it rose a figure, colossal, made of branches and bone and teeth, antlers spiraling like thorny towers, eyes burning with green fire. It had no mouth, but it spoke directly into Naomi's mind, its voice like thunder soaked in blood. "You are the error. You are the unrooted. You will be broken. You will be reborn." Naomi stood her ground, trembling but unyielding, staring into the eyes of the god of red pines. And for the first time, the god blinked. The god stared down at Naomi with eyes of burning green, hollow and endless, like galaxies corrupted by rot. The air thickened around her, turning viscous and hot, crawling down her throat with every breath. Drew lay behind her, still unconscious, his limbs twitching sporadically as if caught in a half-remembered nightmare. Naomi's hands trembled not from fear, but from the terrible weight of knowing something ancient had chosen to see her, and more terrifyingly, that it might not look away. The woman, the creature wrapped in flesh and vines, moved closer, her footsteps squelching on the pulsing floor of the chamber. "You are the fracture," she whispered again, her voice a melody soaked in death. "You broke the bloom. You interrupted the pattern, but all things can be rewritten." Naomi clenched her jaw, every muscle in her body tensing as the heat radiated from the green light pulsing beneath her skin. "I didn't choose any of this," she growled. "I didn't want your mark. I didn't want your forest." "Want is irrelevant," the god thundered, though its mouth never moved. "Roots do not ask before they spread. Fire does not ask before it burns." Naomi took a step forward, dragging each foot through the blood-slick floor, her eyes never leaving the towering mass of wood and bone. "Then maybe fire is what you'll get," she spat, "because I'm not playing your game. I'm not your vessel. I'm not your seed." The green veins across her arms flared violently, shooting up her neck and around her eyes. Her vision flickered, and again the images assaulted her. Trees twisting into faces, children being buried alive, bodies reduced to bark and sap. Bell screaming as his ribs cracked open and roots poured out. But this time she didn't flinch. She held on to it. She forced herself to watch it all, to feel every death the forest had swallowed. Something shifted inside her. Not just fear, but rage, grief, a clarity sharpened by horror. She wasn't meant to survive this. None of them were. They were only soil, temporary vessels, fertilizer. The god loomed closer, antlers now scraping the edges of the chamber, its breath, a sound like 1,000 trees falling at once, pressing against her skull. "You will kneel," it said, "and be reborn, or you will be devoured and made part of the root." Naomi stood taller. "Then bite down hard," she hissed, and reached for the knife. The same blade she had taken from Belle, still crusted in dried blood, humming softly in her grip. As she lifted it, the runes on its edge began to glow. Not red, not green, but white. A light that hurt to look at. The god screamed. Not a sound, but a vibration, so loud and low it cracked the flesh walls and sent Drew rolling across the floor. Naomi lunged forward, slashing the blade into the air between her and the creature. The chamber exploded with light, and suddenly Naomi was standing in the forest again, no longer inside the womb-like chamber, but at its center, the true center, the heart of red pines. The trees towered in a perfect circle around her, blackened and twisted, their bark covered in faces contorted in pain. And in the middle of the clearing was a pulsing mass of roots, breathing like a living heart, dripping with blood and sap. It was the god's core, the root of everything. Belle's body hung above it, suspended by vines, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes now glowing faintly. His skin had cracked, revealing wood underneath. He was nearly gone, nearly consumed. Naomi ran toward the heart, the blade burning her hand, her mark reacting violently, her blood boiling. The ground trembled as roots shot up to stop her, slashing the air like knives, but she ducked, dodged, spun. One root tore through her thigh, another scraped across her cheek, but she didn't stop. With a final cry, she plunged the knife into the massive roots. The world went silent. Then the ground screamed. The trees howled. The sky turned red. The root pulsed once, then split open, and from within spilled black blood, worms, bones, eyes that melted as they touched the earth. Belle's body fell and shattered like dry wood. The faces on the trees wept sap. The forest roared as though a god had died. Naomi collapsed to her knees, gasping, bleeding, shaking. The light from her arms began to dim, the runes retreating into her flesh. The knife crumbled in her hand, turning to ash. For a moment, everything was still. Then Drew groaned somewhere behind her. She turned, her limbs numb, crawling toward him. His eyes fluttered open. "Naomi," he croaked. She nodded, tears streaking through the blood on her face. "It's ending," she whispered. I think we broke it." But the forest wasn't done. As she helped Drew to his feet, a low rumble spread beneath them, and the clearing split open, revealing a black abyss beneath the earth. From its depths rose a sound. Not a growl, not a word, but a question. And the forest waited for their answer. The question wasn't spoken, yet Naomi felt it thrum against her ribs, curl through her nerves, seep like poison into her spine. Something below the earth had taken notice. Something older than the god they just wounded. The forest groaned as if its pain had summoned an older, deeper entity from its roots, and Naomi instinctively clutched Drew's arm to steady herself, though her legs barely held her. The trees around them were no longer just twisted wood, but now loomed with strange consciousness. Their faces etched deeper, eyes blinking slowly, mouths opening in silent wails. The earth beneath their feet pulsed, a heartbeat that didn't belong to anything human, and from the abyss at the center of the clearing, a wind began to rise, cold, ancient, and full of whispers that made Naomi's teeth ache and blood taste metallic in her mouth. Drew looked around, dazed, eyes red and wide. "What the hell is happening?" he gasped. Naomi didn't answer because she wasn't sure herself. She only knew they had pierced something vital, something sacred to this place, and in doing so had awakened something even worse. She remembered the whisper from the chamber, the thing that had worn a woman's skin and spoken of patterns, of blooming and breaking, and now those words made sense. This was never about saving themselves. It had always been a test, a ritual, an offering, not to destroy the god, but to rattle its prison. Naomi realized the knife hadn't been a weapon. It had been a key. As the black abyss widened, roots fell away like the petals of a rotting flower, revealing stairs carved in bone, spiraling downward into the dark. The trees began to lean inward, forming a cage of wood and face and blood. And Naomi knew with brutal certainty, if they didn't descend now, they'd never leave. "We have to go down," she whispered. Drew stared at the stairs and shook his head violently. "You can't be serious. Naomi, this is suicide. We should run. Get the hell out." But Naomi pointed behind him. The trees had moved, closed. There was no longer a way out, just the path downward. She didn't wait for him to agree. She walked toward the edge of the abyss and stepped onto the first stair, and immediately the world went silent. Not the kind of silence that brings calm, but the suffocating silence that presses against the eardrums like water, thick and menacing. Drew cursed behind her, but followed. The descent was endless. Each step creaked with wet bone and flesh, the spiral narrowing, the walls pulsing with veins that twitched under the skin-like surface. Naomi's mark burned hotter with each level, her skin turning pale as sweat poured down her back. the green light in her veins dimming and flaring erratically. The whispers came again, clearer now, words she didn't understand, names not meant for human mouths, syllables that caused nosebleeds and sent spiders crawling through her vision. "They're watching," Drew muttered. "I can feel it. Behind the walls." In the walls, Naomi nodded. "Don't speak to them." "What are they?" he asked. "What's down here?" Naomi didn't know. She only knew that something called them, demanded witness, craved sacrifice. The stairs ended in a vast cavern that smelled of ancient rot and burnt marrow. At its center was a lake of black sap, its surface undisturbed, too still to be natural. Surrounding it were idols made of bone and hair, towering like gods long forgotten. Some had 6 arms, others had no faces. One had a mouth that stretched across its torso. The air was thick with heat and buzzing, as though a million unseen insects fed on their skin. Naomi stepped toward the lake, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. As she approached, something beneath the surface shifted, and a shape began to rise. It wasn't the god they had seen before. It was worse. It had no form, just a mass of tendrils, mouths, and blinking eyes that bled green light. Naomi's body froze, her mind cracking at the edges, as the truth poured into her. The forest had never been about worship. It was containment. The god in the woods was merely a warden. This thing, this shape rising from the lake, was the prisoner, and she had just unlocked its cell. "Naomi," Drew screamed, "we have to run!" But there was nowhere to go. The chamber had closed behind them. The idols were turning, watching. The lake boiled as the thing rose higher, its mouths chanting in reverse, in languages long dead. Naomi stumbled, and her knees hit the ground. Blood poured from her nose. The green mark on her arms flared one final time, and then vanished. It had served its purpose. The ritual was complete. The prisoner was free. Naomi didn't remember screaming, but her throat was raw and bloody as the sound of her own terror echoed against the pulsating walls of the cavern, and her body trembled with a fever that came not from illness, but from proximity to something her mind could barely comprehend, something that bled madness into the air and turned each heartbeat into a countdown toward obliteration. The thing that rose from the lake was not bound by shape or time. Its mass twisted and bent in impossible directions, sometimes resembling a giant corpse stitched from gods and insects. Other times, nothing more than a writhing storm of tendrils, eyes, and fangs that shimmered like liquid shadow. Every movement it made seemed to crack the air like glass, and each shudder of its vast, repulsive form released waves of despair so thick that Naomi could taste them, like ash and old blood, and earth dug from graves that predated language. Drew clutched her arm, his fingernails digging into her skin until they broke through, and his voice was hoarse and wet with panic as he whispered, "It's inside me. It's looking through me." Naomi turned and saw it was true. Drew's eyes had turned completely black, not the color of shadow but the color of absence, like voids that had forgotten light ever existed. She screamed his name, slapped him, shook him, but he just laughed, a sound that was not his own, too deep, too hollow, as though his voice box had been borrowed by something ancient. "They fed me to it," he rasped, grinning. "I'm the final course. You open the mouth, Naomi, now it eats." She stumbled away from him, bile rising in her throat, her limbs heavy and slow as though gravity had tripled in this chamber. The lake was churning violently now, and something was crawling out from its shores. Figures cloaked in bark and moss, humanoid but broken, with joints that bent the wrong way and mouths that stretched ear to ear in silent screams. Their skin peeled like tree bark, revealing wriggling worms beneath, and they reached for her with fingers that splintered into roots, whispering in unison, "You were chosen. You were born marked. Bloom." Naomi backed against the bone wall of the cavern, and it pulsed beneath her, alive, breathing, beating like a womb. Memories she'd buried clawed their way to the surface, dreams she'd forgotten, childhood nights spent sleepwalking in the woods, waking up with sap on her feet, seeing patterns in leaves, in blood, in cracks on her bedroom wall. She hadn't escaped the forest all those years ago. It had planted something in her, something dormant that now bloomed with agonizing heat, coursing through her veins, turning her bones to bark and her breath to mist. She screamed and clawed at her arms as the green light returned, this time not just glowing under her skin, but tearing through it, like vines erupting from flesh. The cavern responded. The idols began to hum, a low, resonant tone that vibrated the marrow of her teeth and pulled her to her knees. Drew dropped beside her, shaking, laughing, weeping all at once. It's breaking through. The seal is gone. We're inside its mind. Or it's inside ours. Does it matter? His face changed, his jaw unhinged, eyes bleeding, bones stretching as though something larger was wearing his body like a costume. Naomi tried to crawl, but her arms no longer worked. The air was syrupy and full of static. Her ears popped, and then the voices came again. Clear this time, spoken in her voice but not by her mouth. You were the vessel, not the savior. The ritual was written in your bones. You were always going to kneel. You are not the hunter. You are the altar. She sobbed as her hands fused with the floor, roots sprouting from her fingertips and anchoring her to the bone. The god, if it could even be called that, was fully formed now, towering, shifting, laughing in languages that pulled memories from her skull and fed them into its writhing mouths. The walls of the chamber began to collapse outward, not in destruction, but in transformation, becoming trees, endless and red, sprouting instantly and stretching skyward, as though the entire forest above was being reborn from this single seed of horror. Naomi felt the forest folding into itself, growing from her spine, blooming from her ribs. The red pines were not a place, they were a body, and she was now its heart. One final thought clung to her before she lost the last fragments of identity. Maybe no one had ever escaped the woods. Maybe all those missing souls had simply become part of it. Part of this thing, feeding its roots, whispering through its leaves. The forest didn't take people. It grew them. The ritual was never about summoning. It was about remembering. It was always here. It had just been waiting for her to come home. When the sun rose over the red pines, it cast no light. The trees stood unnaturally still, their crimson needles motionless, despite the breeze that should have moved them. Hikers on the distant edge of the forest paused, uneasy, sensing something wrong in a place they had never set foot in. Birds no longer sang. No insects buzzed. Only silence. A silence so absolute it rang in their ears. Deep below, in the place no map marked and no memory preserved, the ritual had completed itself. Naomi's body no longer existed in any form a human could recognize. What remained was a monument of flesh and bark, eyes embedded like knots in wood, pulsing slowly as green ichor oozed from her roots and fed the cavern floor. She had become the forest's core, its womb, its altar. Her thoughts no longer belonged to her alone. She heard every root, every whisper, every cry caught in the breathless spaces between the trees. The forest had devoured her name, digested her pain, and exhaled something older in return, something with purpose. She wasn't just a vessel, she was now the forest's voice. The god, ancient and formless, had not risen to conquer or destroy. It had awakened to continue, to grow. Through Naomi, it saw the modern world, its roads, its lights, its arrogance, and it knew patience. Above ground, no search party ever found Drew or Naomi. The police discovered the van, abandoned, its windows cracked, a camera melted into the dashboard like wax. Inside, only static played from the recovered footage, a flickering image of trees breathing and Naomi's voice whispering, "Come home." The townspeople resumed their lives, though dreams began to twist in the weeks that followed. Children spoke of trees moving at night, of faces in the bark, of roots knocking against windows. Campers disappeared, hikers vanished. Some returned days later, changed, silent, their eyes ringed with green, their mouths unable to describe what they'd seen. The pines grew taller, their red deepened. The forest expanded by inches at first, then feet. No one noticed the creeping until satellite images confirmed it. The red pines were spreading, slowly, persistently. Every tree seeded from Naomi's will, every whisper carried her voice. It wasn't just a forest now, it was a being, and it was watching. Deep beneath the earth, where the ritual began, the altar remained, pulsing with every heartbeat of the forest above. No humans entered again. No cults were needed. No idols carved. The god had found its shape. The ritual would never need to be performed again. It had rooted itself in the world. It had become the world. And it would wait, as forests do, until all who once ruled the surface knelt once more before the trees.